You go to the light, and that might be the trick. And then if you go to the darkness, which is peace, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to try to go in between.
Well, you know what? It's really funny because when you remember back in the 80s when Dr. Moody came out with a near-death experience, that he had done all these things about all these people were having the near-death experience and how everybody would describe the tunnel and the light. And then came the people that rained on the parade who would describe these really bad near-death experiences, like that it was really dark. It was like, whoa, okay. Before it was, okay, no problem. You have the tunnel and then, the light. And then you have your loved ones, and maybe you would be sent back. But it was like, okay, no problem. You knew where you were going. And then, of course, other people started saying, no, they had really bad near-death experiences where it was really dark. And I was like, okay, well, like you were saying, well, which is the right door? The lady or the tiger? Which one do I choose?
Yeah, I don't know. And unfortunately, we don't get to make that choice till it happens, do we?
Well, no, right. It's one of those things that, you're thinking. It's like, I mean, it's one of those things like you don't know till you're there, and then it's like, okay, too late to ask.
I will say this.
Hopefully.
I was just going to say this. My father had dementia. He had Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And the last year he was alive, he was in a bed. He was basically nothing more than a vegetable. I mean, he was not even coherent. Mm-hmm. And the doctors told me, that and they said one of these days, you want us to put him on life support or whatever. And me and my brother said, no. Well, but we get a phone call, and it's from the doctors where he was at. And they said, your dad came to, and he's talking, and he wants to see you. So I had to make like a 60-mile trip to go where he was at. I get in there. And he's in his room, and he's talking, and he's totally coherent, and he's asked me if I, did what I was doing. We had a little talk, and then he said, I'm going to die today. And, that kind of freaked me out because here he's been, in a vegetable state for a year, but he was talking normal, and the doctors told me they haven't seen anything, at least they haven't, where somebody came through and, and then he started talking about my mom, which passed away about maybe 6 years before my dad did. About she came to see him, and then his brother and my uncles, which are all been passed on, and he was telling me that he's going to be joining my mom and all this stuff. And then he tried to eat a sandwich, which he didn't do a good job. The doctor said, well, maybe he needs a rest. Well, he passed away before he even got home. And it was funny. He came to, he was coherent and lucid. And then, it makes me wonder. But it made me, he was telling me like what heaven was like. And he was totally, like I said, he was making sense, and he was just, it scared me. Because maybe sometimes when people do on the verge of death, maybe they are seeing their loved ones.
Well, one time I was speaking to a hospice nurse, and, sometimes in hospice, people can last for a while. It's not necessarily, a lot of people think that, and she had been doing this for quite a few years, and I remember her telling me, she goes, you know what, I know when one of my patients is going to be passing away, and I say, how? She goes, well, when they start talking to or about relatives that are deceased. She goes, in some cases, since I've worked with them for a bit, when they start talking, they start mentioning certain names, I know that person that they're talking about, whether it's a husband or whatever, is deceased. She goes, and sure enough, when they start saying or talking about, I spoke to so-and-so, or they're actually speaking like that person is in the room with them, then she says, sure enough, they're not long for this world. And she goes, sometimes they'll have health crisis and they come out of it. But once I start seeing that, and she says the same thing. Some of them sometimes have dementia or, they have Alzheimer's or they're just, they're not all there. She says, man, they'll start talking to people who I know are dead. And she says, and that's one of my signs that they're going to be dying soon. So, yeah.
I don't know.
It's kind of comforting if you think about it, though. in the sense of.
Well, I think it'd be comforting for the person who's about ready to pass on. I don't know. I tell you, it wasn't really comfort for me watching. What like I said, we had a normal conversation about job wise and all this stuff, and he was asking questions because he thought it was maybe 2 years. He lost like almost 2 years of mental capability. So he was living in the past, and I had to bring him up to what was going on. Right. And, he was digesting all that stuff, but I don't know. I don't want to go through that again. I tell you that, unless when it's my time.
Oh, no. And you know what? It's really weird. You hear about some people waiting for their loved, their family or a special person to arrive. And then there's others that it's really weird. They kind of wait till everybody leaves. Like everybody says, I'm going to take a break or I'm going to go home and shower. It's almost like they want to pass, but it's like, I'm going to do it when you're all the way from here for some reason. I've heard of both scenarios playing out. But it almost sounds like he really wanted to have that last conversation with you, Gary. He wanted to, to me, it almost sounds like trying to make you feel better, like especially, that he told you he's going to be with your mom and in other words, don't worry, I'm good.
Oh, yeah. And we had a little problem the last, I'm the one, along with my brother, it put him originally, from the hospital into the nursing home. And, he was not ever happy about that. But as the dementia went on and the Alzheimer's went on, then pretty soon he didn't even know who we were. But, I don't know. I just saying for myself, I don't want to go through that. If I die, I want to die fast and again, what you're saying that some people want to wait to their loved ones leave the room. Maybe they hang on. Okay. And they're hanging on to make closure with their family. But then at a certain point, they probably are saying to themselves, please leave the room for I can go meet my maker now. And I hate to say it, but I'm sure that happens. Sometimes it does work out that way. It's especially if you've got, we always think, you do have sometimes family members that even if the person is elderly, they still they're grieving a lot, and it's almost like, what, I can't leave while this is going on. And on that note, I have also heard, sometimes where you will have somebody that's passed on and the person that's left behind grieves so hard and starts with that don't leave, that they actually bind them down. They don't let them leave because they want to comfort this person. This person is grieving so hard and in so much despair that they almost bind them from going on to where they should be because they're caught this person, doesn't seem to be able to. I need to help this person, especially, a loved one, a spouse, a child, a grandchild, or vice versa, whatever it is. So sometimes you have to be real careful because I have run across that. As a matter of fact, when I was doing some other hypnosis, and we talked about that briefly before, that part of the work I did with alternative hypnosis was with spirit attachments. And that every once in a while you will run across that where the attachment is a loved one. Well, what you're saying basically, and maybe I got this wrong, you have family members there and somebody's about ready to pass on. And basically they're making the person who's passing on feel guilty that they're leaving him. And then they don't go to the light. They're there, trying to give comfort even after they pass on to their loved ones.
Right. Like the person is, don't get me wrong. Of course you're going to grieve, but, this is the person or the loved one that will say, don't leave me, don't leave, or how could you do this? Or, things that people say sometimes when they're grieving, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like, in other words, and sometimes that spirit, which understands that it's kind of passed on, doesn't want to leave because they feel like either I have to protect this person or comfort this person or they, especially sometimes, even if in life they were the protector, they took that role, that's their personality. They get attached. They don't follow what they normally do, which is, I'm going to use the stereotypical go into the light thing. Wherever it is that you're supposed to go, they don't. And and they can get enmeshed in somebody's aura, and then that becomes that's a whole different thing. But yeah, and then they can't leave. Even when they want to, they can't leave because they're enmeshed in that other person's aura.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes when and that happens, when you have people, how people, when it's fresh, they're grieving, and then as months go by, they kind of start getting over it. And that's why sometimes you have these people that you never see them get over the grief. In other words, they never move on. And it's because they have some type of spiritual attachment.
Or
and by the way, also strong hate will do that.
Or then when they do get over the grieving, they all of a sudden start hearing the refrigerator open and close and the steps and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes even when they move out, the next person that moves in that property, now all of a sudden that attachments to that property.
No, this thing is attached to them.
Oh, to them personally.
No, the attachment. Well, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you will have a spirit that will stay behind but no, what I'm talking about is a spiritual attachment to that person. In other words, let's go with the married couple, for example. Let's say the husband dies and the wife goes through this, oh, don't leave me, how could you, whatever, or he might be the judge, whatever. He attaches to her. He just stays behind. He wants to comfort her, gets enmeshed in her aura. And by the way, I'm giving you a very condensed version of the process. He cannot leave. 6-7 months down the road, a year down the road, she's better. Okay, she's like, for some reason, she can't not get on with her life. A lot of times she'll feel like somebody's staring at her. In other words, sometimes she might even feel he's like right next to her. And maybe at the very beginning, it was kind of a little bit comforting. But then as time goes on, okay, it's not. And basically, he's attached to her and he cannot leave. And sometimes you can get that person to move on, but it's a really, really weird situation. And also, if let's say the person that's left behind us alive wants to move on with their life, maybe meet somebody new, get remarried.
Oh, yeah.
They'll run into problems along those lines because basically they have an attachment from their ex-spouse or whoever that is.
That is scary,
and I've heard of that.
Oh, I have, too. Now, we're down to like the last 5 minutes. Why don't you tell people about your books?
Okay, well, my first book, it's when you talked about it's about the titled The Haunted History of the Old West Wicked Ladies and the Bad Hombres They Loved. And basically it's ghost stories, but it has a lot to do with like Old West, the frontier towns. It's very similar to what you were describing that went on in that place that you used to work at, which was a real eye-opener when I did the research. Then I did another one called Lady in the Blue Kimono, which is more like true murder mysteries that I came across that, contrary to modern days, a lot of things, really horrific crimes happened. A lot of them didn't get solved. Very similar. You know how the Black Dahlia, we hear so much about that?
Oh, yeah.
There was very similar murders to that along the same lines. Some did get solved, others didn't. And I did one that came out at the end of last year, which was supernatural safety. And I talk about things that people can do themselves when they believe or they think that something paranormal is going on in their house, or things to do even before you move into a new location. And then I've got another one I'm working on that's going to come out in August, and it's titled, it's again about it's called An Odd Collection of Old and Obscure True Ghost Stories, and these are just short true ghost stories, older times, and some of them they definitely fall into the urban myth, but there's a lot of them that were true. And again, these are those stories that sometimes you know what it's about or what prompted it, and it got resolved. And others, it's just things that people witness without any further explanation as to what occurred. What prompted it, in other words.
Oh, yeah. Well, how can they find your books?
Well, they can go to either MarlenePardo.com, or they can go to Amazon, Marlene Pardo Pellicer, or they can go to miami-ghost-chronicles.com. On all those locations, they can find out about me, the books, anything else. And, they have questions. Sometimes, like I said, I do consult with some groups. I don't have a problem with that. Questions sometimes about weird, like recently I had an investigation. They were consulting about what they thought was maybe an Egyptian artifact that somebody had brought back that they were thinking was possibly the root of a